Where would you rather live? Tens of thousands of people are risking their lives to get here, and yet the people who are here are saying, oh, this is the worst place in the world. We are the best at the very thing that we are being accused of being terrible at. Slavery existed in the entire world, and then the West ended it. I watched it when on October 8th there were people parading with Palestine flags in the streets of London. That is not people who want freedom, that's people who celebrate terrorism.
We ignore the fact that Hamas have in their charters the object of obliterating the Jewish people. It's a complete inversion.
Integration is only possible when the number of people coming is manageable. The year I came to Britain, 1996, 55,000 people came here legally. Now we have more people than that coming illegally every year, and we're an island. No country can have illegal immigration at these levels. It's absurd. I don't want British pensioners to freeze because somebody in Downing Street decided that we must save the planet by reducing our carbon emissions from 2% to 1.98%. That's insane. You don't have to be obsessed with Donald Trump to think that what he is doing now is better than what was being done before. Being strong has to be one of our values.
It's great to see you again.
Good to be back with you.
Last time we were talking, the Labor government had just been elected here. You'd had the Conservatives suffering a major loss, a really big one, because they lost not just to the Labor Party, which actually didn't get a lot of votes anyway, given that they were able to form government, but also to Nigel Farage's Reform UK. I'd just be interested in opening up this discussion. How do you think it's now going, 6-7 months in? It didn't look like they had much of a honeymoon, and Britain seems to be not altogether a happy place at the moment.
But when was it last time? I think this, I think a lot of people want to make this about the Labour Party. I think this is something that's been going on for 2 decades now from both parties. So I can't sit here and be like, oh my God, the Labour Party are doing exactly what we all knew they would be doing. And by the way, a lot of people think that they're really, really like radical. I don't think on a lot of things they are. In fact, on some things they've done good things. They're about to tighten up the rules on people who come here illegally being allowed to become citizens, right? So they are doing some things as best they can. But the overall situation, I think, is way bigger than either of those two parties. And it's been going on for a long time. And I think that's why you saw the election result that you saw. This idea that, you were going to vote in a Labour government and things would change significantly. That was never the case. The economy is stagnating. Yes, of course, the Labour Party, it's moved from the left position of X number of years ago when the idea was that you uplift the poor. Now you tear down the rich. Yes, that's changed. And so they're raising taxes on people in a punitive way. For example, this VAT on school fees, that I don't know how closely you followed this, but it's basically a way of punishing middle-class parents, not the uber wealthy, but middle-class parents who are just scraping by to have their kids in private school, and there's putting money aside to making sacrifices to achieve that, because the super rich they don't care about VAT on school fees. It's a trivial amount of money to them. So yes, the Labour Party is doing stuff like that, but overall, the big picture, the economy is still stagnant, illegal immigration is still very high, on all the other things, I think I saw this brilliant video by Douglas Murray, literally on the train here, in which he talked about the fact that a poll showed that 11% of young people in Britain would fight for their country, said so in the poll. That's not the Labour Party didn't cause that. And the Conservative Party didn't cause that. It's a bigger thing that's going on, and both of them are failing.
But that was the point of your book, really, in a way. Yeah. You were saying, hey, come on, you've got so much going for you. Celebrate your freedoms. Don't give up on your society. Believe in it, be engaged. But it's not happening in the West very much yet.
There is an exception.
We'll talk about America in a minute.
Yeah, there is an exception to that.
Yeah, where you've got a great disruptor.
Yeah.
Who will do a lot of disrupting.
Several.
Well, surrounded by other disruptors.
Yes, right. I saw this speech by J.D. Vance that he gave to the AI summit. Did you see this, John?
No.
Oh, it's magnificent. And you know, the details of the AI is a whole different thing. But it was when I watched that speech, I don't really know much about J.D. Vance, so it was just a first impression almost. I've never met him or anything like that. I just saw a guy who was re-articulating something that you've discussed so many times, but he did it very well, which is that our increasing risk aversion is the central problem, right? The fact that we are afraid of words, the fact that we are afraid of strong expressions of sentiment, the fact that we don't have convictions in public very much, and the fact that we don't say, actually, our countries are great, our society is great, that we don't say, tens of thousands of people are risking their lives to get here, and yet the people who are here are saying, oh, this is the worst place in the world. No, that doesn't make sense, right? And the fact that we are fearful of all the different things when it comes to physical safety. You know, this is a funny example, but I was watching a guy who I watch play computer games. It's a very sad thing to do. I'm sure you don't spend a lot of time doing it.
Not much, no.
But he has more followers than both you and I on YouTube and other platforms. So he's more successful at least, right? But he was talking about the fact that when he was a young man, I think he's about my age, he won some kind of competition, and the winner, the prize that they got was the opportunity to smash up a CRT monitor with a hammer, right? And that was fun, right? And he said they would never let you do that now. And I thought that's so true, right? Because there's glass flying everywhere, it's unsafe, whatever. So on every single thing, whether it's expressions or behavior or anything, we've become very safetyist. And he was talking about the fact that yes, we of course should be concerned about AI, but we have to look at this as something that also presents tremendous opportunities. And that's what happens when people become obsessed with risk aversion. They become blind to opportunity and become blind to possibility. And that's where we are, I think.
That seems particularly true, since you describe it that way, of Britain today. It's as though somehow, and don't get me wrong, I don't want to be sounding overly critical. I'm concerned. I want to see Britain thrive because of its history, because of out of that history what it has to contribute to the world, its understanding of how the world works. I think it's still needed at the table of nations, if you like, in a big way.
It's something you Aussies really understand, John. Sorry to interrupt, I'm very sorry, but I think it's a really worthwhile point, because I visited Australia last year, and that's one of the things that I took away from it, meeting people in Australia. The way you guys talk about Britain is the way I wish we talked about Britain.
Elaborate.
Well, you feel that it's the mothership, right? And you have in the way that you have a reverence for your mother, you have a reverence for the mothership, the place from which you came, right? Culturally, ideologically, mentally, in some cases, physically, right? Whereas the people who live here don't have that veneration nearly as much. And I think we should. I think we've spent a very long time now being afraid to say something that we should say, which is the accusation that we are the most intolerant or places that are defined by racism and slavery and all of this other stuff. It's not just false, it's the exact inversion of the truth. It's the exact inversion of the truth. It's the exact opposite of the truth. And I debate these people all the time, right? I say to them, whether it's TV or whatever, and I say to them, look, even behind closed doors, I will say this to people: you're a black woman, or you're a this, or you're a that. Where would you rather live than in Britain or Canada or America or Australia or New Zealand, like 5 countries? I'm sure I've forgotten some. But it's not many countries, and they're all Western countries, right? So if you would rather live somewhere else, name me, is it China, is it Russia, is it Japan? Where are these beautiful places full of tolerance and all of this? We are the best at the very thing that we are being accused of being terrible at. The same with slavery. Slavery existed in the entire world, and then the West ended it.
Well, this country
specifically, right?
Voluntarily, without bloodshed. Well,
right?
A lot of pain for the slaves, but without the bloodshed of the Civil War.
That doesn't mean that slavery is
America has
is defendable, but what is That's not what you have to defend. The accusation should be, why were you the first empire to end slavery? If there's an accusation to be made, if there's an inquiry to be made, that's the question we should be asking. Why was this country and its ideas and a place where this novel realization that slavery is wrong, something that prior to that basically all human beings treated as kind of like, part of life, right? Like you keep your dog in a kennel, you keep people you've conquered in war in bondage. That's what everybody thought. So this country then comes up with the idea that actually that's wrong, and it is then this country and other countries so heavily influenced by it, in the Anglosphere in particular, that are the most accused. It doesn't make any sense. And we've got to say this right now because this is the moment, for the reason that you alluded to, that there is a cultural revolution happening. And you either join it or you know which way the other path goes, right? The other path goes to stagnation, defeat, decline, etc.
Well, that's very important. And you and I are both speaking at ARC here in London. That's why we're here. We're saying decline is not inevitable.
Yeah.
But having said it's not inevitable, it's going to be our lot if we're not prepared to be more realistic.
Absolutely, and that's actually, a point that needs to be made as well. But I think it's funny because I'm sure we'll talk about Ukraine. The position that you and I probably don't like on Ukraine is called the realist position, and that may be more of what happens going forward. But I do feel like the realist worldview is making a comeback a little bit. This idea that, it's always a tension because idealism is important, right? We want people who are idealistic and we want people who are realistic, and together they can pull each other towards a kind of common balance, right? But I feel that the idealistic people have been in charge for the last 20 years at the very least, to an extent that's detrimental to the greater good. And so the return of a more realistic approach on balance will be great, but it will have certain consequences as well, where people are less willing to fight for certain ideals and are more like pragmatic about things. But pragmatism is also important, and we just haven't had enough of it. We just haven't. No pragmatic person would say, let's take a bloke with a penis and stick him in a woman's bathroom. There's no pragmatism in that. I don't know how clever it is. I'm not a theoretician. I haven't studied gender science at university. I'm just saying, a pragmatic person who had no education whatsoever would also know that that's not a smart thing to do. Education
and wisdom are not necessarily always acquainted.
Exactly. And we've had a lot of rule by very educated people. And I mention him in every interview that we do, but I have to. This is what Thomas Sowell talks about. The blindness of the overeducated. The people who are so educated that they begin to invent new things just to invent new things. If they're a very important part of society, but if they're allowed to run everything, it ends badly.
Interesting. I must say, just in relation to Australia, that I think there is a general awareness of the incredible legacy that our British forebears gave us. We are independent, and scratch an Australian and they'll say, we're a nation in our own right, thanks mother and mum and dad, but recognise we're grown up now. I just have to throw that in for the Aussies. You would have picked that up as well. So I would say that we are respectful of our, I suppose you'd say, parents, if I can use that term of the British, but very aware we're our own family now. And that's important because what is it that we appreciate? Well, it's democracy. It's the rule of law. It's in many ways the free enterprise model that has made Australia so very prosperous.
Life in Australia is very good for people.
Well, they are very unusual things globally, and people don't recognise how good they are and how many people have lifted, the countless numbers of people that have lifted out of poverty in our own societies, but also more broadly globally, and yet we want to invert everything, as you say. On the subject of inversion, it strikes me that the worst inversion, the example of that we've seen of that recently, is this extraordinary way in which the idea is caught on that Israel is committing genocide, whilst we overlook the fact that it's a misuse of the word anyway. By no stretch of the imagination could you ever mount a credible case. Not even the ICC is arguing that, and they're very anti-Israel. While we ignore the fact that Hamas and bodies like Hamas specifically have in their charters the object of obliterating the Jewish people in the Middle East. That is genocidal. It's a complete inversion. And it's a really interesting thing that our culture, for all of our education, is capable of that sort of revolution, really, putting on...
But it's the same inversion. That's why it makes perfect sense. The inversion is exactly the same. The reason people hate Israel is not even anti-Semitism in a lot of cases. A lot of these people hate Israel because Israel is strong. And the surrounding countries, in particular the Palestinians, are weak. They're less populous, they're less militarily sophisticated, they've got less money, right? So they're the underdog.
They're not democracies?
They're the underdog. They're the underdog in these people's heads, and you have to hate the strong, and you have to love and pity and try to promote and take the side of the weak. That's their mindset.
So they're victim makers, is that the argument?
No, the argument is that it's the same inversion that they do about us. They hate the West for being successful. Right? And they hate Israel for being successful. They choose to side with the Palestinians, many of them, not because they know anything about the conflict, remotely. And I don't claim to be the world's greatest expert on the conflict either, I should just say. I'm just saying the reason these people who know even less than I do about that conflict are so persuaded that one side is right and the other side is wrong is they have a simple way of measuring. This is the whole neo-Marxist worldview. The oppressed are right and the oppressors are wrong. So if you point your finger at someone and say, that's an oppressor, that person becomes wrong, right? Or if you see that they are strong, they must be an oppressor, therefore they must be wrong. Well, that doesn't make any sense. But so the reason many people have this attitude to Israel and Palestine is exactly the same reason they hate the West. They hate Israel for exactly the same reason. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I see what you're saying. The irony or the horror in all of that, of course, is that any fair consideration of the Jewish people, who after all, there are only 15 million of them in a global population of 8 billion, is that in fact they themselves have been maligned and mistreated and misunderstood more than probably any other people on earth. They've known what it is to be victims, particularly in the Holocaust, but not only the Holocaust, down through the ages. And to be fair, they don't often play the victim card themselves.
It's not something I've even thought about in the context of Israel, to be honest. When I look at Israel, I don't think about it. I know this will sound very strange, but I don't think from a Jewish perspective or about the Jewish people or anything like that. I just look at what happened and what happened in response. If you had two groups of people who were not Jews and Arabs or not Jews and Muslims, were just, green people and red people or green people and blue people or whatever, and one side did what that side did on October 7th, I think that it would be very clear to me what the situation there is and what the response was likely to be, right? This is the point I keep making over and over. I don't even have a dog in the fight particularly. If you stand back and look at what's happening, it's quite clear what's happened there. I watched it with my own eyes. I watched it when on October 8th there were people parading with Palestine flags in the streets of London. Right? That is not people who want freedom, that's people who celebrate terrorism. So whatever the backgrounds and the religions behind it is kind of irrelevant. That particular conflict is as simple as that to me. Right? There is a side that celebrates terrorism and it celebrates killing civilians and it celebrates that, and there's a side that doesn't. Which one of those is right? To me, it's pretty obvious.
One of the alarming aspects of that is that, of course, those marches here in this country, in Australia, right around the world, the protests on the university campuses and so forth, there were many people there who would regard themselves as progressives. They're not Islamic. They don't have Arabic backgrounds. They are Westerners who hate the West and are making common cause with terrorists, describing brutal activities by terrorists as resistance rather than barbarity. And so it highlights for us, it should be a real warning shot, that there are a lot of people in our own midst who will make common cause with others who loathe us,
because they
even
loathe us
though
as well.
instinctively those two groupings don't get on.
But, well, no, they do get on because they both loathe us.
Yes, that's the point.
They get on beautifully because the people on the left who've been taught to hate their own society and the terrorists, sympathizers, they all hate the West. And they all hate the values that we have. So why wouldn't they make common cause? It makes perfect sense.
In the short term.
In the short term.
Because many of those people who hate the West that are travelling at the moment would be seen by, with those terrorists, would be seen by the terrorists as useful idiots.
Oh yeah, but of course, but they never, the useful idiots are called useful idiots because they're
For
idiots.
a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're idiots and they don't see that or think about it. Because they're more interested in the feelings that they have than the reality that they're dealing with.
See, it's another one of those inversions that you were talking about. That's what it is.
Of course, complete inversion. But it's quite logical, which is why ultimately we have to say what I just said, which is, and what I'm planning to say at ARC. Our civilization is very special. It's very, very good in compared to every other civilization available. We got to be, every human being is, I think, is a kind of, ideally the right balance between pride and shame, right? There's certain things that you have a pride about, and pride is, a sin in Christianity, and for a good reason. But also we're all should be able to be proud of certain things that we've done and feel like, I did that, that was good, yeah. And also there's shame. There's things that I've done and you've done and every human being alive in human history has done that they're ashamed of, right? It's about having the right balance between the two. I don't want our society to be blind to its errors. I don't want what, increasingly is happening in Russia, where you're only allowed one version of history. No, I think our leaders from the past should be capable of being criticized. I do. But that has to be factually based. It has to be based on the reality and the
balanced.
facts. And balanced. And it's just, what's true for a human being is true for a society. We have to have the right balance. And I think we have to teach our children and remind ourselves that we are right to be proud, pleased with, happy about, have a sense of affinity for the place in which we live and the lineage from which we come, whether that's culturally or genetically or whatever. That's fine. It's good to be to have a sense of confidence. And I remember it's funny that this has to be explained. Like I have lots of friends in Ukraine, for example, who, if you say to them, if you ask them about where they're from, they will tell you the city that they're from, and then they will tell you how proud they are to be from that city. They will say, we have a Philharmonic orchestra there, and we have this beautiful church. They speak about the place in which they live with a sense of pride. It's not because they hate everyone else. They just have a passion for the place in which they live, and inculcating that in ourselves and in our children, I think is very important. And in the way that applies to your local town, that should also apply to your country.
Well, because it was a fellow Russian, it was Solzhenitsyn, who had that famous line about the dividing line between good and evil, not being between one human being and another, not between black and white or man and woman, or Catholic and Baptist or atheist or Hindu, but somewhere across every human heart. Then you're making the obvious point. Societies are the same. We ought to learn from the things we've got wrong, the things that we're ashamed of, but we ought to take a right pride. It's not a personal pride that puffs up me because I'm somehow clever, that I come from a culture that did this or the other, this, that or the other, but it's a pride that says these things are good, they produce good outcomes for people. We set the slaves free, whatever, maybe never have had them in the first place. Incidentally, I didn't know this until recently. It was the Old Testament Jews who were the first people who said slavery is wrong and didn't keep slaves, as I understand it.
Well, coming back to the other point that you were making, I think it's really important to say this. People confuse being proud of being from a place with attempting to personalize it to yourself. But I don't look at it that way. I think at a cultural level, in primitive human societies, they discovered fire. And then there were people whose job it was to keep the fire and to pass the skill of keeping the fire down to other people. That's what our culture is, right? That's what a culture and a civilization is. It's a set of ideas about how to live life and how to do things that we pass down to the next generation. Now, if you think that fire is evil, you are unlikely to pass down the process of making it and the fire itself to the next generation. So we can't think, fire's hot, but it's not evil, right? It has other properties. It's useful for cooking. It's useful for all sorts of other things. So we've got to have a sensible balance, and our civilization is worth passing on, and the way to pass it on is to remind people that it's worth passing on. I think that's incredibly uncomplicated.
But it's not happening in the West.
No.
One of the reasons it's not happening, of course, is that most of these histories begin with family history, and so much of it's broken and shattered now, which is extraordinary. And another reason is that our education system really fails appallingly in this. And I actually think one of the problems we have with mental health amongst young people is that they're not given a sense of place. They're not given a sense of pride in the things that we've got right, a sense of appreciation that we're actually fortunate. We have much to be thankful for, that we stand on the shoulders of giants. We don't want to be pygmies and have the next generation of kids cursing us for undermining and smashing even their inheritance.
Well said.
Well, into all of this now, we've got the most extraordinary disruptor. Now, we all know who we're talking about. I admire the American people, and the first thing I'd want to say is be careful before we rush to judgment. If you don't like Trump, and there are a lot of people who don't in the West, because apart from anything else, they didn't see him coming because our media didn't explain, by and large, what was really happening in America. I think it's important to remember it's a very vibrant democracy where people, by and large, do take their freedom seriously. I don't think the American people made a flippant choice. I think we need to understand that to some extent, the very things we've been talking about, the American people, a lot of them were saying, this great country's losing its way. We're being told we're bad. We're being told we're no good. We're not being well managed. Our living standards are going down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And no one seems to be able to get a handle on it. So we'll take a punt. We'll go for somebody who will disrupt it and give us a chance to reset things.
That's very true. And I think the reason that our media, as you say, don't understand his appeal at all is that like the way that we see Donald Trump is sort of through the prism of the like central London journalist who went to Oxbridge filter. And I'm not saying that's a bad filter. It's a filter that exists and it has validity in certain contexts. But there's also another filter, which is like the American people, a normal American person. And those two people's ideas about what the right president is not the same. It just isn't. Now, you know, they both think the other's wrong. I'm just saying, I don't, you know, when we hear things in Europe or in Australia about Donald Trump, it's always through the prism of he's uncouth. He doesn't speak in the way that a gentleman's supposed to speak. And it's true, he doesn't. But nor do most Americans, actually. Americans speak in a more direct, in a more, in some ways in a much more warm way, in a much more funny way. You know, the Americans speak in a different way. And Donald Trump is the way he is because he's American. That's a character in their world that doesn't exist in our world. So we find him very strange for that reason. I think a lot of this, John, is just like people's instinctive reaction against him. Because if you look at his policies, there's things that I disagree with him on, as you know, and we'll find out how the Ukraine situation works out. But broadly speaking, I don't look at what he's doing in government now and think, oh my God, this is awful. Quite the contrary. In terms of, you know, what Elon is doing with Doge is incredible. I want 10 Elons in Westminster. And I think anyone in any Western country feels that the bureaucracy is way too bloated. And we got to find out, do we really want to be sending, as in the case of the United States, $3 million to a rapper in Gaza to make anti-Semitic songs? That's a waste of taxpayers' money. Kanye West would have done it for free, right? What I'm saying is, like, slimming down government and getting rid of all this unaccountable crap is a good, whether you're right-wing or a left-wing person, is just a good, right? It's a good thing to do. Now, within that, there will be things that are adversely affected that actually in the balance of things we might want to keep. Well, then some of them will come back over time. But right now, is the time for a spring clean. Is that fair? You know, we've had a long time building up all these NGOs and quangos, and this person pays that person to do a study which they then cite on CNN, and then before you know it, it's on Wikipedia, and suddenly the government's paid this person 10 grand to create this opinion in reality, right? While pretending that our money is being best spent, when none of us agree with this opinion. That's not, I don't want that. So yes, I think some of the things that he's doing, I think he's using American power to advance the interests of the American people. That's what he's trying to do. It's quite a nice break from everybody else, don't you think?
Well, I think it's extremely interesting, and it's incredibly important because we're at a tipping point. That's what we're at ARC. You know, we're all recognising that a sense of declinism is setting in. And we need to break that. There's no reason for us to go into decline. We don't want to go into decline. We don't want to lose our democracy. We don't want to lose our freedoms. We want to restore our prosperity. And I think that's not just in the interests of countries like yours and mine. I actually think it's in the interests of the world.
Of course it is.
In the end, when we talk about the liberal global order that's prevailed since the 1940s, it's prevailed because America has been strong enough to make sure it prevails.
Absolutely. And believed in its values, even if you don't like them. Right, they believe in freedom of speech. Europeans believe in restricting people's speech so that no one's offended. That's at a governmental level, right? At the moment, that's who you're choosing between. If you're choosing between America, the American administration believes in free speech and is prepared to accept sometimes very unpleasant costs that come with free speech, right? The Europeans want the opposite, right? That's the choice, right? And so this is a question of values.
Well, that's right. But there's an even bigger choice that I'm alluding to, and that is that if America loses its global dominance, what will a new global order look like?
Well, that's what I'm saying, right? Our values are better than the values that would be in place of those values if we were not the strongest civilization. So being strong has to be one of our values. So it sort of makes sense, doesn't it? And so, you know, this idea that we should walk around and sort of keep ourselves small, and, you know, we have this weird thing. I know it's a British thing. Maybe this is a sign that I haven't fully integrated, but we have a debate in this country every time the Prime Minister of the country goes to some global summit on a big plane. And everyone's like, oh no, he's spending government money. I'm like, no. What you think Xi Jinping arrives on a megabus? This is a game. There's a game being played here, and people will treat you depending on how powerful they perceive you to be. And human beings are very shallow. And if you've got a big plane with the name of your country on it, people tend to respect that. Especially people who are not Western and don't have this moronic ideology where the stronger you are or appear to be, the worse you are as a human being. They don't have that. Xi Jinping doesn't think like that, nor does Vladimir Putin, nor do most people in the world. I think you'd back me up on this, John.
Oh, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Having dealt with people in different governments around the world.
Yeah. Yep, that's right. You know, we don't want braggarts, but on the other hand, we don't want our leaders to look like they're not respected or respectable.
No. On an international stage, I think of them kind of like our champion in a battle, right? Do you want somebody who is strong and capable in that role, or do you want someone who's not, as the Americans had at the last election? I think it's as basic a choice as that, frankly, right? Is someone who is, you know, strong and fully present, and someone who isn't. Why would you? Why would? Of course there were, but I'm just saying at a cultural level, that's what I see.
Yeah.
The policy is massive. Of course it is. Of course it is.
We'll come to those in a moment, but just on the reason that I was sort of going to interject, and I don't want to interrupt because that would be rude, but I think the American election has to be understood too as a giant rejection of much of what the democratic architecture, and frankly, until recent times, Republican political architecture stood for. There was a very interesting little comment. You probably read many of the comments after you've done a show with Francis. I read them. They're very instructive. They're usually nice, and that's warming as well. But I did one with Victor Davis Hanson the day after the American election, and it ran very strongly. And someone wrote in and said, I'm a black man who voted for Trump. You ask why? When I was told to vote according to my skin colour, I decided no, I'm a working man. I've got a wife and children. and I'm finding it tougher because the economy is not being well run. So I voted as a working man for my prosperity and for my country's economic management. I thought that was very powerful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, the economics really matters, and we'll see how it plays out because nobody can predict the future. But the reason people voted for Trump is they perceive him to be much better for business. And that's from the working man that you're talking about all the way up to CEOs of big banks. And it spans the entire range. Nobody in the small business or big business world in America was thinking, oh, this is going to be terrible for us when Trump comes in. No, they're quite the opposite, right? So that's part of his appeal. And America is a very business focused culture, much more than we are. You know, in Europe we talk a lot about public services and, you know, the government bureaucracy and whatever. In America, they mostly, people are very interested in business. Normal people. How do you create a thing that makes you money? How do you advance? How do you... So yeah, it makes sense that people would do that.
But he was saying something else, of course. He was with Martin Luther King. He's saying, hey, this colour of my skin's not the issue.
Of course.
I'm first and foremost a father, a husband, and a working man.
Yeah. Well, look how bad things had to get before we could come back to that.
Well, let's hope it continues a trend. I say that as somebody who's absolutely opposed to racism. I think racism is totally appalling. It's partly why I find the rise of anti-Semitism the oldest racial prejudice of all, so deeply offensive. And I always admired Martin Luther King, whatever his strengths and weaknesses were, for his insistence that skin colour shouldn't matter. Now it seems in woke world that you're a racist unless you refer to people's skin colour.
Yeah, I think that's shifting. I think...
Well, that's this bloke, evidently, if he's part of a trend, and we know a lot more black people voted for Trump this time.
I just think that argument is washed out now. I think that argument has been disproven. It just has. It's been disproven by reality. You know, if you look at the voting patterns of people who are from, not just black people, but other minority backgrounds, both in America and in Europe, the idea that the one side of the political spectrum owns those people is just, it's just gone. I really do think it's gone. I think this silly idea, look, in practice, that might run for some time, but at an ideas level, I think that idea is fundamentally discredited. And I hear more and more people feeling very comfortable about saying that. People who were very reluctant to say it only 5 years ago. In fact, people who might have argued with you in public about that very statement now kind of get it. I think
that's good.
I think we may have turned the corner on that. I just, the one thing that really struck me, because we were in America at the time of the election, was the non-reaction. Do you remember 2016, the pussy hats, the protests, this, that? Look at this pathetic stuff now. No one cares. No one is paying attention to it. Even the mainstream media aren't running article after article about a few people who got together to protest, because everyone knows you might like it, you may dislike it, but this is what the American people wanted. That's what they wanted. That's what they voted for. You might disagree with it, but that's what they voted for. So shut up. And that's kind of where we are with a lot of these things. You know what I mean? So culturally, it's just got to that point, I think, where we tried your way for a while. It doesn't seem to work very well. We're trying this way. And if you want to protest, you've misunderstood the moment, I think.
Two questions fall out of that very quickly for me. America first.
Yeah.
This presumably presents the Democrat movement in America with a massive challenge. They've got a big problem. They know they've got a man problem for a start.
Yeah.
Because they talked men down. They were part of the movement that basically got into this whole business of virtually describing, particularly if you were white, men as toxic. Now, I know that's a broad generalisation, but it's obviously there's been a big reaction against that. They've got to recover those working class men in particular, who were traditionally their supporters, so they've got to start talking the economics. At the same time, they've got to recognise this is a massive repudiation in America, we'll come to other countries in a minute, of the whole architecture, if I can put it that word again, of wokeism or
the entire progressive
DEI,
project.
the whole lot.
The entire progressive project is ideologically absolutely annihilated right now.
In America?
In America. DEI, all this, you know.
Gee, the big companies were quicker to move.
Oh, everybody was quick to move. Look at Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
During COVID, he was censoring everyone left, right, and center. Now he's pro free speech. You know, they all. You know, one of the things I think we can all take away from this, it's one of the reasons I am slightly optimistic, is just most people didn't go along with this stuff because they truly believed it. They just went along with it because it's convenient, you know, and we just have to offer them a choice out of that. And in America, things got so bad that they had a choice out of that because they weren't prepared to put up with that anymore. Let's hope that we get to that stage here. I don't know that we will. There are many good reasons why that won't happen that I can see, but let's hope that we do.
Well, that was my second question that arose out of the earlier comments. To what extent do you think Trump's election and the disruption that's happening in America, and I use that word neutrally, just to say it's the great shake-up, to what extent do you think that might start to redefine politics here and in Europe?
We'll find out. I don't know. By the way, the way you use the term disruptor makes me think that you think I'm being overly positive about Trump.
No. It's not aimed at you at all. It's my term. To say that I'm seeing this as he would see himself as a great disruptor.
Yeah, of course.
That's partly why people put him.
But what I was about to say is exactly that. That you don't have to be a massively enthusiastic, fanatic, obsessed with Donald Trump and have his merchandise on your wall at home to think that what he's doing now is better than what was being done before, right? And so it's not something that requires a deep love and affiliation with the entire thing. You just go, what he's doing is better, pragmatically, on a practical level. Forget about the personalities. He's just doing better things than were being done, right? Sorry, I've been rambling for so long, John. Forgive me. I've forgotten the core of your question.
Just the extent to which what's happening in America will start to redefine politics elsewhere.
Well, we'll have to see, because I think at a cultural level it's definitely already happening, in terms of the chatter, so to speak. That's the sort of things that people say now, the sort of things that they don't say, the pronouns they're removing from the email signatures, all of this other stuff.
You're seeing that here?
Yeah, of course, because the cultural movement is kind of, on the one hand. And on top of that, I actually think getting DI out of government was less important than getting DI out of government in order to get it out of corporations, to give corporations permission to stop it. Because what will then happen is these global corporations, well, if we're not doing DI in America, why would we be spending X million pounds in London, in our London headquarters? To do, gender, lesbian, whatever training. Why don't we just make cars or whatever it is that we do, right? So I think that will bleed over in that way. But ultimately, I do think this cultural realignment will have to manifest itself politically in order to change the law, right? Because you have to change the law. It's not enough to have good vibes. That's clearly not, the good vibes aren't working, such as they are. So that means it has to manifest itself in some kind of vehicle for that sentiment to coalesce around. And in the UK, neither the Labour Party or the Conservative Party are that vehicle. The Lib Dems are that vehicle for a more leftish audience. And Reform are that vehicle for the right side of that electorate. And we'll see if they are up to that task. We'll find out. Nobody knows.
No, we don't know.
Nobody knows.
We don't.
They have a lot of challenges that the Americans didn't have. One of them is Donald Trump needed... How many people would a normal person be able to name out of the people that he surrounded himself with? I would say Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., J.D. Vance. Maybe Vivek as well, right? That's 6 people, including or not including him. Reform have to find 200 candidates to win seats off their own back. Not because they've got the right rosette, but because people locally believed them that they would be better, right? And the only way that's going to happen, I think, is first of all, they're going to have to look very far and very hard to find these people. And if they are lucky enough to find them, at that point, I think things would have to be absolutely terrible in the country. At which point people would say, well, you know what, you don't look like a politician, you don't sound like a politician, you may not know what you're doing, but what have we got to lose?
This is the sort of, the cancer's so serious, we'll try the novel, unproven.
Yeah, we'll go with the experimental cure.
We'll go with the experimental.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's not because I think, you know, Reforms have some great ideas, but it is a pretty new party with very few, you know, big names in it. They're going to have to find those or manufacture those people over the next period. And they're going to have all sorts of battles internally. You know, you're already starting to see it. You know, some people think the leader's got too much power. Some people think he hasn't got enough, you know. And as things become more successful, tensions can rise.
Yes.
As I'm sure you know, and you know, the discussions about who gets the credit and who's, you know, all of that.
Yeah. All of that.
So we'll find out.
A couple of other things that I'd be interested in your views on. Drill, baby, drill. There's a couple of things that fall out of that. One is, the reality is that it's likely that America now will pick up a lot of wind economically. It'll start to move ahead strongly again. Its productivity almost alone, weak growth, but it's growing. Most of the rest of us are experiencing declining productivity. The decline in productivity in Australia is really serious, and that's pushing living standards down.
Yeah.
But America's likely to go in the opposite direction,
They work
notwithstanding
so hard.
their big debt.
They work so hard in America.
And he will loose the shackles, so it's already happening.
Yeah, but that's but that works in a country where people work really hard. When you take the shackles off people who never wanted to be shackled in the first place, you really get real growth. In Europe, we have to have a mind shift on that. We've become very comfortable. We like the shackles. We like the shackles because the absence of shackles comes with risk.
Yeah.
And we don't like risk.
Americans seem to revel in it.
They do. And so, and you know, I've spoken about it with Americans, and they'll say, yeah, well, we were the ones that got on a boat and left.
Yeah.
Of course, we're more ambitious in that way and more risk-taking. Like, we're willing to have a go. But we are of the same fabric, us and the Americans. And I think when we think, this is one thing I've been thinking about a lot, John, and it's interesting given our conversation about Australia and other former colonies of Britain. I think we, and probably people of your heritage and your generation in particular, think of it as a one-way thing. You know, the mothership, Britain gave the world and the Australians this and the Americans this foundation. I think we need to start thinking about this as a two-way membrane.
I agree with that.
There's a lot that we can learn from America. And their attitude to business, their attitude to self-reliance, their attitude to new ideas, trying things, a positive vision, willingness to take chances. You know, they're a great country for a reason, and I think part of it is that. And there's no reason British people can't be like that. There's no reason Australians can't be like that. We're human beings too, where we're capable of adopting different attitudes depending on the moment. I think the attitude of, you know, feeling like we shouldn't rely on ourselves, we need the government just to rescue us just in case, whatever. That doesn't seem to me to be producing a successful society.
Well, there's a classic example of that right next to America. Under Trudeau, Canadian living standards or pay levels have slipped from 80% of America's down to 70. Now, those have been years when America's been a bit up and down itself. Now it'll take off. But there's a classic example of what the restrictive hand of big government, big brother knows best, heavy regulations, ill thought through energy policies, those sorts of things that seem to go with progressive politics.
You have to unleash people who want to do things. They're not everybody in society, but what they do is they create jobs for everybody, you know, and some of them will crash and burn too. But that's part of the creative process of anything. But what we're doing in this country instead, from a tax perspective, just means that no creative activity is really sustainable here in that way. You know, we could be leading on all sorts of things. I mean, if you think about the fact that we still have two of the best universities in the world that really are capable of passing down great knowledge and training people to think in the most rigorous way, scientifically and in other ways, right? When you think about how much cultural creativity and mixing there is here, the amount of money that there's still here. There's incredible opportunities. But if the government is going to come and take half of whatever you eventually make if you do, what's the point? It's almost not worth having a go.
Britain went there in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
And you had a flight of capital that wasn't reversed really until the Thatcher years.
Yeah. The brain drain I see around me in Britain right now, it's not as bad as what we saw in Moscow in the early 90s, but it's like it was at the beginning. You know what I mean? Like people are starting to, the people who can leave, which is very few people out of all the people that might consider it if they could, they're leaving. You know, the smart people, the driven people, the people whose business is portable, I mean, they're not hanging around. And we've lost more millionaires in any country in the world except China in the last few years.
Yeah, where are they going? America?
America, Dubai, you know. Now look, there'll always be people who want to live in Dubai and not even pay 10% tax. I'm not saying all of those people are leaving solely for that reason, or that we can keep all of those people. There are some people who are just going to hop between countries or whatever. But most people would much rather live in London than they would in Dubai. If London was a place where they could pay reasonable taxes, be free from crime, be free from their children being ideologically indoctrinated in school, having clean streets, a place where, you know, all of these things for, you know, people will throw statistics at you, say, oh, you know, the British Crime Survey says the blah, 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 blah. That's not what I hear from ordinary. I mean, there was a commentator on Twitter who's, I think he's a freelance guy. There was somebody posted a tweet of his a year prior saying, oh, London is the safest city in the world, and then a year later him being mugged. Like, you can tell me all you want about statistics. People do not feel safer in London at the moment. I have a friend who, I told the story on Chris Williamson's show. I have a friend that I know is a very wealthy guy, left the country after he was leaving a restaurant. 3 guys in balaclavas jumped out of a van, pushed his pregnant wife to the side, smashed him to the ground, took his watch off his wrist and rode off, right? You think that happens in Dubai? I don't imagine it does. I don't want to imagine what happens to the people who try, but you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's not an environment which attracts people who are going to build the big companies and create the businesses that are going to employ all the rest of us. We need those people here, and we're chasing them out instead.
Just to go back for a moment, the impact of the changing America on the rest of the world, the obvious other issue is climate change. It strikes me that the Paris Accord is in deep trouble, if not dead. The reality is that global consumption of all fossil fuels continues to rise strongly. That's the reality. You've got a situation where China, Indonesia, India, America, you know, 4 massive economies with big populations that do a lot of manufacturing, unlike your country and mine now, they're not going to be held back.
Why would they?
And yet it's almost sacrilege in your country and mine to question net zero by 2050. I think the pressures are going to be absolutely massive as our living standards decline relative to the Americans. The voters are going to say, this is too extreme. You're switching things off before you've got substitutes.
And this is the
Am I
big
misreading
challenge.
it?
No. You're absolutely right. However, this is the huge challenge for all of us who talk about this. This is the moment to try and explain it to people, because I don't say this in any sort of condescending way at all. I just mean that a lot of people have not looked deeply into this issue, and all they've heard is a one-directional narrative. Right? What they hear is the climate's burning, the planet's about to die, we've got 12 good years left. If we do not reduce our emissions to zero right this very moment, everyone you know is going to die. And the planet will die, and everyone you don't, the 7 plagues will descend upon us and all of this other stuff. That's what they believe. And more importantly, if you ask the average person how much they think net zero is going to cost, do you know what most of their answer would be? Most of them would be surprised there is a cost. We have not even begun to win this argument. We have not even touched the argument. We've said, please don't call me a climate skeptic because you don't want to make my country poor. You know, because I don't want to be called someone who wants to make his country. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. It does not make any sense to impoverish us to save the planet when that's not going to save the planet. If it did, I might be up for it, but it's not. It's not going to save the planet.
For the reasons I've just outlined.
Among other things, but also the other thing is Britain's responsible for 2% of global carbon emissions. We could all slit our throats today, wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't change anything. So why would we make our people poor instead of generating prosperity that breeds creativity, that allows us to make the technological advancements that would actually save us from the problems that climate change could bring if we go too far with emissions? Why don't we do that? Why don't we think about what's the cost, what's the benefit, and try and act in a smart way about it? Why can't we do that? Why does thinking that make you some kind of bad person? On the contrary, I don't want British pensioners to freeze because somebody in Downing Street decided that we must save the planet by reducing our carbon emissions from 2% to 1.98% by 2050. That doesn't make any sense. That's not to the benefit of the people of Britain. It's not to the benefit of the next generation or anybody. It's just a stupid thing to do. It's just stupid. And we're doing it for ideological reasons. And that's the argument we have to win. But we are nowhere near, because the average person, and you can see it with politicians who hate net zero, politicians who say it, you know, I don't want to talk about specific people, but there are many politicians who've made these arguments, especially behind closed doors, but also in public. You know, net zero is unaffordable. You speak to them behind closed doors, they all know it's a crock of shit. They all know. But they don't want to say it because they're like, I don't want to be talked about as a climate denier. I'm sorry, the false narrative on this issue has to be talked about. And the false narrative is not that human activity has no impact on the climate. The false narrative is the solution to climate change is poverty. No, it's not. It's just factually not. So can we please stop making ourselves poor in order to achieve nothing?
But part of your argument, and I think it's right, is people don't understand that the loss of cheap, portable, reliable energy will have a massive impact on our prosperity, but it won't be affecting a whole other heap of other countries that are ignoring it.
Correct.
They become more powerful.
Correct.
They become richer.
Absolutely.
In some cases, quite frankly, more threatening.
Yeah.
We've achieved nothing. Mm-hmm. That's the logic of it.
And when we don't produce energy, the price of energy goes up, and then people like Vladimir Putin suddenly have more money. And when they have more money, what do? Right? So why would we not want to make energy cheap? Not least because that's the very best thing for human beings ever. Almost all human progress, a lot of the technological progress is about being able to use more dense forms of energy over time. Right?
I'm amazed we still haven't won a recognition yet, though, that one of the greatest misinformation whatevers that's out there, there's still this widespread view that the wind and the sun don't send a bill, therefore it's the cheapest form of energy. Yet, a simple examination of the countries that have the most expensive energy in the world shows you very, very quickly it's the countries that have gone down the renewables only road or tried to go down that road. The only ones that have had high penetrations of renewable energy that have been able to keep the costs down are those that have a lot of nuclear and or hydro as well. The proof is in the eating. Renewables turn out to be more expensive because you've got to back them up.
Well, John, you're a lot smarter and better educated on these matters than me. I don't know. I'm just saying about that specific issue. If it so happens the wind energy is cheaper, let's use wind energy. And if it's not, let's not. And let's invest in things that are going to be cheaper than what we're using now and cleaner at the same time. Let's find the energy of tomorrow. Right? Let's build nuclear reactors.
So a mix.
Yeah. Or maybe not. Maybe there are forms of energy that are just not going to be. We'll work out that this is not the best way to do things. Let's try everything, sure, but then let's look at the results. Yeah? And it doesn't seem to me like we have an abundance of cheap energy at the moment in this country. I think energy prices in Britain are 4 times what they are in America. Now, it's awfully difficult to run a business, particularly a manufacturing business, if you're paying 4 times as much for the most basic input that you're using in what you're doing? It's kind of difficult. It's kind of difficult to run a normal company when your energy bill is 4 times as high. Whatever you do. It's kind of hard to have a good standard of living.
See, this is the point really about America's move. It will result in America surging economically while others are held back.
Yeah.
And I think that is a major challenge for policymakers. And part of the problem we've got ourselves into is that the public has not been really informed about the trade-offs.
Well, when things go really bad, that's when we're going to have to tell them the truth.
Might be.
You're very, very poor because you're paying a lot more for your energy than you should be. And that's because you've been sold a lie for ideological reasons. And now you've got to open your eyes.
But you just touched on, it's not just people's power bills. It's the industries that employ them.
Well,
it's the industries that generate the wealth that goes into government coffers to pay for schools and for pensions. So there's the opportunity cost that comes with unreliable. That's even worse, by the way, than expensive power. Unreliable power and expensive power. I think this is what Trump has done on energy, I suspect, is an enormous challenge that other Western countries ignore at their peril.
Well, I don't think they really have a choice, to be honest. Not least because, one of the things that will happen as America makes energy cheaper is they're going to be able to do on AI what most other countries can't do because of how much energy that stuff requires. And on every other business activity that requires a lot of energy. So they're going to pull ahead while we deindustrialize. And I know there are many people who are working very actively in America to reindustrialize America. They want to bring manufacturing back. And I'm not talking about politicians who say things. I'm talking about real people on the ground that are doing this. Austin Bishop is working on this. He's going to be at ARC. There are people who are looking at this very seriously. And that's what we should be doing. We should be doing the same thing. And by the way, people talk all the time about the cultural dimension and the riots that happened in Britain over the summer and all this other stuff. You know what? I don't know whether there would have been riots, even though the cause of those riots was very serious and awful. I still don't think there would have been riots if all the people who were rioting had really good, well-paying jobs. I don't know that that would have happened. I don't know that that would have happened. I suspect it might not have done. I suspect that if we had lots and lots of men in particular who don't have economic opportunity, having those opportunities to make not only a decent life but a better life for themselves, a sense of optimism about the future, you'd see a much more cohesive and stable society. Because whatever our other disagreements and whatever, when things are good, everyone's slightly more pleasant to each other. It's true in the family, it's true in every situation, right? So prosperity is important, culturally too.
I take the point. Coming back to England, and as I mentioned at the beginning, since we last talked, you've now had a chance to see how the new government's unfolding. My sense of it is that there's an enormous frustration with the current government's performance. The Conservatives haven't had a chance to rebuild. Nigel Farage's UK movement, Reform, I understand, has more grassroots members now than the other parties. It's in your wildest dreams. I mean, might they have the numbers one day to form a government in this country? Is that a naive question?
No, I don't think it's a naive question given that they're leading in the polls. It might be naive only to the extent that we discussed earlier. They need 200 or 300 or however many MPs that it's going to take. And they don't currently have, as far as I know. Maybe I'm missing them, but they don't. I don't see 200 people from the Reform Party who have the ability to be elected right now. Maybe I just haven't seen them yet. It's perfectly possible. That said, I don't see 400 Conservative potential and current MPs to do that either. So we don't know. But it's going to be a very long 4 years. It's going to be a very long 4 years. We talked about this at the beginning. I don't know that there's a lot of frustration with the current Labour government. I think I made the point earlier. There's a lot of frustration with the state of the country.
Right.
And this is why, if you look at polling, people will say that Brexit was a bad idea on balance. I think it's only like 30-something% of people think Brexit was a good idea.
Really?
On reflection, something like that, yeah. When polled now. But I don't think that has anything, and I'm a Remain voter, by the way, but I don't think that has anything to do with Brexit. I think it's a referendum in their minds on the state of the country. And what they're saying is, since Brexit, Britain has become worse. Doesn't mean they attribute, well, maybe they do, but the attribution may not be correct, is what I'm saying. They may attribute that decline to Brexit. I don't think it's down to Brexit. I think it's down to something else, because that decline was happening before. So if you had a constant decline and then in the middle of something happened, then it continued to decline. I don't think that's Brexit. And to say nothing of the fact that European countries aren't doing any better than us either. So that would be a big counterfactual to me as well. I just think whether you're a left-wing voter or right-wing voter, you don't think the country is moving in the right direction right now. I think it's a broader thing than a political party. So, you know, there are not many people in this country who think, you know, if we turf out, if we have an early election, if such a thing is still possible, and turf out the Labour Party, I'd love to get the Tories back in. No one is thinking that. No one is thinking that, I promise you. So, as you say, the Conservative Party has to try and find its voice in this very difficult situation, because I tell this story, I told it when we interviewed Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservatives. I was at an event shortly after the last election in which the Conservative Party was trounced, and I said to a Conservative MP who was there, why do you think you lost the election? And he went, oh yeah, we lost to the Lib Dems. So the Conservative Party is a party of two wings, and there's a wing of that party whose views are so irreconcilable with where the majority of the centre and the centre-right is politically. I don't see how you get those people back. You know, it's a very difficult job, I think. And right now, the Conservative Party is in a very, very bad state, which I will say this without any hesitation, which they absolutely deserve. And I feel no pity for them whatsoever. Not only did they let down the country, they let down all of us of all political stripes who were promised certain things. You know, I never voted for the Conservative Party in my entire life until 2019. And the reason I voted for them in 2019 was that I thought that the clamour for undoing Brexit, which I voted against, nonetheless, was so undemocratic and so wrong that I will vote for whoever promises to actually see it to its logical conclusion. Because if we can't have a referendum that we then implement in this country, how are we going to govern ourselves? Right?
I think you were wise.
Yeah. But
for the reason that you say.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But my point is also that I lent them my vote, like the people in the Red Wall lent them their vote. And what did they do with it? And so a lot of people feel that, whether they're left or right or whatever, the people who are not going to be dying, you know, voting for the Conservatives to their dying day, a lot of people lent their vote to the Conservatives, and they did not do the things that people wanted, nor did they do the things that they promised. And that to me is a much bigger issue. So they're in a really bad way because of their own actions, and nobody should take anything away from that. They really need to go away and think very, very hard about what kind of party they want to be. And that's also true of other parties. You know, everyone's going to have to think about what is it exactly that they're offering people. And I don't think politicians in this country have quite caught on to the fact that we are not in a business as usual moment. We are in a populist moment. It's just a fact of life, whether you like it or not. And so you're going to have to be pretty bold to get people's attention right now, whoever you are as a politician. And so for the Conservatives, that's a challenge, because they always have Nigel Farage, who has no problems being bold, whereas the Tories have to keep this coalition of people together who don't even belong together anymore. Yeah. You know, someone said to me the other day, people keep talking about a merger between the Tories and Reform. Why wouldn't they merge with the Lib Dems when they're so ideologically aligned, right? That's how a lot of people on the right of the Tory party, or who've left the Tory party, now see the left side of the Tory party. And I'm sure the left side of the Tory party see Nigel Farage as an abomination, and you know they wouldn't touch him with a barge pole. How do you resolve that? It's very difficult.
Where does immigration fit into all of this?
It's central. Immigration is central to all of this. And the big debate we're having in this country is about leaving the ECHR. Most people, even who comment on it, have no idea what that actually means. It's a proxy for saying we have to stop the boats. That's what people mean when they say we have to leave the ECHR. They feel that everything else has been tried and it's just not happening. That's what we have to do in order to end illegal immigration, basically. That's a huge part of the debate. On the right, even the Tories are not, most Tories believe we should, but a lot of them won't say so publicly, or will caveat it in various ways, because they are trying to keep that other side in, because the Conservative Party don't want to have another falling out over Europe. They still think it's about Europe, because no offense, but most of them are in their 60s or 70s or whatever. They think it's about that. This is not about Europe. This is not about Europe. This is about people who feel, oh my God, I am a liberal from the 90s. I am an immigrant myself. How are 55 or 60,000 people coming to this country illegally on a boat? How is that happening? That's insane. The year I came to Britain, 1996, 55,000 people came here legally. And now we have more people than that coming illegally every year. And we're an island. We literally have water around us. People have to get on a boat to come here. How is it happening? It's insanity. And therefore people will conclude that it's a result of a legal structure or whatever that's causing this thing that should not be happening. No country can have illegal immigration at these levels. It's absurd. It's just absurd. And because that's the position we're in, we're having this debate, and immigration is the deciding issue for a lot of people. I was talking to somebody who is a Lib Dem the other day, and he was talking about how illegal immigration is such a big problem. And it's also true for the Tories and for Reform. And I think for Labour too. It's very high on people's list of concerns. So, you're gonna, if you want to be elected at the next election, you're gonna have to be very, very clear about what you're gonna do and very robust on it.
I'd be interested in your views on people's concerns about immigration and, if you like, whether there's a hierarchy in there. How much of it's economic, it's pressure on our jobs, pressure on our infrastructure. How much of it's we're a small island and we haven't got room, and how much of it's about further, if you like, cultural disruption and weakening of the society?
I think a lot of it is all of those things. I think the cultural disruption thing is the thing that people feel strongest, because I think we live in a very alienating time anyway.
Yes.
We spend so little time connecting with other human beings in the flesh. We spend so much time online that the sense of community is naturally deteriorating anyway. Then increasingly people travel more and settle in countries that are different to the one that they come from quite often. People relocate a lot. So maybe not countries, but someone who grew up in the north of England might be living in London now. That used to be more rare. Now it's very, very common. People move much further away. So they're estranged, not estranged, but they're distanced from family. They see each other more frequently. And so the sense that it's easier to form communities with people who are more like you, culturally and in terms of values, right? So when you have a lot of cultural disruption, when the person who lives next door to you is not someone who you understand very well, and it's maybe a little bit more difficult to make that connection, then I think it's natural that the more and more and more of that happening is not something people particularly welcome. It doesn't mean that we can't adjust to each other over time and get to know our neighbors of a different background and whatever, but I think there's a sense that integration is only possible when the quantity is appropriate, when the number of people coming is manageable. It's like food, you like food, but you wouldn't have 3 meals over the course of an hour because you can't digest all of that. It's the same with people coming. I think immigration can be immensely beneficial to a country.
Well, it certainly has been to Australia.
Yeah.
Except to say this, that if you build it too quickly, and if the people coming in don't particularly share, and this is where multiculturalism can end up destroying culture for everyone. Hang on to your core values, because we think, I'm unashamedly say, you want to come here because our country's a great place because our core values have made it so.
Exactly.
Don't undermine them.
Absolutely.
And
so it's a combination of those two things, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I object very strongly, I'm afraid, to people coming here and saying we want Sharia law, for example.
Yeah.
We don't want Sharia law.
No, we don't. And it's not just about that. Sharia law is an extreme example, and it's much easier to point our finger at and say we don't want people who want a theocratic government in this country. That's not a hard thing to say. A much harder thing to say is we want the number of people coming to be such that they end up integrating into our society and becoming British, as opposed to staying whatever it is that they were when they first came here. And that doesn't necessarily look like wanting Sharia law. It may be other practices or other things that are not compatible with our culture. And they're not just from that particular Muslim community that you're talking about. It could be all sorts of other ones. We need the numbers to be manageable so that everybody can become British over time and dissolve in this pool that we have, instead of becoming a chunk of something in the soup. It's not quite the same thing. I really think people have a duty to integrate fully into culture and to make those racial and ethnic backgrounds irrelevant over time. That's what we should be aiming for. It's to a large extent what they're pursuing in America. They have a different history, and when it comes to the African American population, it's a little bit different. But broadly speaking, that vision that everyone is American and everything else second, that's what we need to have. It's the only way that a multi-ethnic society can work, when everybody wants to become part of that society. And anything that is a barrier to that is a problem for us.
Just to round this out, by way of finishing, I think we'd both agree that the tougher the times, the more effective leadership you need. Understandably, people feel the tougher things get, the more inadequate our leaders look. Are you optimistic that there'll be a new breed of gutsy, determined, thought through, wise, if I can use that word, leaders for tomorrow? Can we find them? Can we encourage them?
Well, I think we are encouraging them, actually. I think we are encouraging them. I think the fact that, I called the American election the podcast election. Many other people did too, because that was the breakthrough moment for podcasts. It was the moment when politicians began to realize that if you want to talk to the people, you actually don't have to do it through the medium of somebody who's battering you over the head while misrepresenting everything you say every 3 seconds, and you have to do that in a 5-minute segment, 20 seconds of which will be clipped and used against you. The best way to reach people is by sitting down and have a conversation with somebody who's going to be fair. Our interview with Kemi, for example, is far from friendly and promotion material for her. We asked her some pretty challenging questions on things that we really care about and think are important, and our audience think are important. But it wasn't to try and make her look bad. I want the leader of the Conservative Party and the leader of the Labour Party and the leader of every other party in this country to be incredible. That's what I want, and I want them all to be incredibly successful. I want this Labour government to be amazing because I care about the country and the people, not political games. So you are going to have a media environment increasingly in which I hope we get to a position where the questions that are being asked are not being asked to look good in front of other journalists, which is increasingly what a lot of these people do. And the questions that are being asked are actually questions that are designed to produce understanding. And if we can do that, then the people who can't be bothered to be paid 65 grand a year to be smeared as the worst person on earth for one day saying something that was slightly off, maybe those people will step up and say, you know what, actually, in this media environment, someone like me, someone who thinks about things, someone who can articulate things over time, someone who's humanly relatable, and talks like all people do instead of, having this some kind of Westminsterized thing where you meet a politician and you realize that actually there's a lot more to the person than you see on TV because they never let it out, because they can't, because they're being badgered all the time. I think that the media revolution will change the culture and politics as well, or at least it has the potential to do that. It's then up to the politicians to realize the moment that we're in, and to say, actually, I'm going to say exactly what I think. And if people push back on me, I'm going to say, well, this is what happens when you tell the truth. Look at all these idiots ganging up on me. I'm speaking the truth. You all know that I'm speaking the truth. And if you don't agree with me, that's fine, because I respect your right to have a different opinion. But this is what I actually believe, so I'm going to keep saying it. Sorry. Right? If we had politicians like that, we'd be a hell of a lot further, don't you think?
Well, I do. And I'll just round it out by saying I think you do a fantastic job with Triggernometry. I'm a great fan. And I think you're doing a great public service.
Well, thanks very much, Johnny. It's a pleasure to be with you again for the gazillionth time. I think we're on episode 84 now. Or something
I don't know about that, but it's up there, and I appreciate it.